The night was calm, a rare occurrence on the war-torn battlefields of France. It was the kind of quiet that suggested more than just a break in the fighting. The air was thick with the remnants of smoke, the residue of explosions, the haunting presence of artillery, and the ever-present tension of a front line in flux. The soldiers of the 9th Infantry Division, worn thin from months of fighting in the mud, had settled for a brief moment of respite. The cold, biting air of late fall didn't seem to matter at that point. The GIs gathered around a small fire inside a tavern in the village of La Roche, a place that had become familiar in its irregular rhythms of battle. The GIs, young men from different walks of life, had been in France long enough to know the cruel weight of war. They had seen the horrors, the burnt bodies, the wreckage of towns, the carnage that followed every offensive. But they had also learned how to survive, how to find moments of human connection in a world that had grown far too alien to trust. And in that small tavern, the familiarity of camaraderie was something to cling to. The sharp, bitter edge of the cold was softened by the warmth of the fire, the low hum of voices, and the occasional laughter that broke through the weariness. The soldiers, tired and somewhat intoxicated from the alcohol they had found in the cellar of the tavern, were unaware of the significance of what was about to unfold. The routine of their night was simple: drink, relax, wait for orders. They didn't have the luxury of expecting anything extraordinary. They had learned not to expect much more than survival. Yet, as always in war, fate had a way of intervening when least expected. The German officer walked into the tavern almost unnoticed. He was dressed in the uniform of a high-ranking officer, a man who had seen the worst of the war, yet had managed to stay ahead of it. He had come to La Roche with a purpose, though it wasn't one he could share with anyone. He was a general, part of a strategic retreat that had become a desperate, uncoordinated scramble in the face of the Allied advance. The general had hoped to find some temporary refuge, to gather intelligence, or at least to coordinate the retreat of his men. The tavern seemed like a good place to lie low, to wait out the next move, but he didn't expect the presence of the soldiers. The GIs, meanwhile, had spent most of the evening in an increasingly disorganized haze, their laughter mixed with the occasional shout. They weren't exactly in a state to notice much, but one soldier, still somewhat sober enough to pay attention, noticed the officer's unusual uniform. The officer was sitting alone at a table, trying to blend in with the chaos around him. His eyes darted nervously around the room, and though his body was still, he seemed to be waiting for something. But the soldier, confused and drunk, felt the instinctive stirrings of suspicion. It took only a few moments before the GIs began to take notice of the officer's presence. One soldier, still buzzing from alcohol, stood up from his seat and walked unsteadily toward the officer. "Where you from?" he slurred, the words thick with drink. The officer, realizing that the situation was beginning to take a dangerous turn, hesitated. He hadn't expected to be noticed. After all, what were the chances that a group of drunken soldiers would know who he was? But the officer's hesitation was a mistake. It gave the soldiers just enough time to focus on him. The German officer, now realizing that his cover was blown, tried to remain composed. He calmly explained that he was just a soldier, just like the rest of them. His accent, his high rank, and his uniform, however, told a different story. The GIs, still half drunk, were beginning to piece together the truth. They weren't completely certain, but they knew enough to realize that this man didn't belong. He wasn't one of them. He didn't look like a regular soldier, and his accent was a dead giveaway. He wasn't from around here, but the crucial question was, who was he? The officer's attempts to deflect the attention were futile. The soldiers, in their drunken haze, began to piece together the situation. One of them called out, slurring his words, "This guy's not one of us." That was enough. That was the catalyst. Suddenly, a handful of GIs surrounded the officer, each of them shouting questions, pulling at him, moving closer. The officer, now trapped, realized the gravity of the mistake he had made. He wasn't just a random soldier in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was a high-ranking officer in a war that had become defined by these small, seemingly insignificant moments. In the midst of their drunkenness, the GIs had captured him. The German general tried to make a break for it. He stood, and in a flash of panic, attempted to flee toward the door, but it was too late. The soldiers, despite their inebriation, were quick to react. One soldier lunged forward, grabbing the officer's arm and pulling him back into the tavern. The other GIs, seeing their comrades move, closed in quickly. The officer, realizing that resistance was futile, stopped trying to escape. His fate had been sealed by the most unlikely of forces, a drunken mistake. The confusion inside the tavern grew as the GIs surrounded the officer. They didn't fully understand what they had just done, but the realization started to dawn on them. They had captured a man who was important. How important, exactly, they didn't know. But the officer's uniform, his rank, told them everything they needed to know. He wasn't just another German soldier. He was a general. The general. They had unknowingly captured a high-ranking officer in the German military. This was a stroke of luck that none of them had anticipated. What started as a drunken confrontation had now become something much larger. The soldiers, still unsure of what to do with their prisoner, quickly secured him and informed their superiors. The initial response from Allied command was one of skepticism. How could a German general have been captured by a bunch of drunken soldiers? Surely this was some kind of joke, a misunderstanding. But when the officer's identification was verified, the truth became clear. The general was indeed a key figure in the German military. The intelligence that he carried could prove invaluable. The GIs, meanwhile, were still processing what had just happened. The officer, now fully aware of the situation, was growing more nervous. His captors were unpredictable drunken soldiers who had no idea of the strategic value they had just seized. But the general wasn't a fool. He knew that his capture was more than just a random mistake. He was an officer, and in war, the smallest of mistakes could be fatal. The reality of the situation began to sink in for the GIs. They had captured a German general. They had done so without firing a shot, without the need for tactical planning or military strategy. It wasn't a result of brilliant military intelligence, but of luck, of chance. The officers quickly realized that the information the general carried was crucial. He had knowledge of German positions, movements, and plans that could give the Allies an edge in the coming months. The general's capture didn't just affect the course of the battle in the immediate vicinity. It had broader implications. The intelligence gained from his capture was pivotal in the Allied advance. It would lead to more successful engagements, better coordination of artillery strikes, and ultimately, a more efficient assault on German positions. The general's knowledge helped the Allies in ways that could never have been predicted. But what was even more astonishing was the way in which it had all come about. This incident, though seemingly trivial at first, reveals something profound about war. It wasn't the carefully executed military strategies, the complex tactics, or the superior technology that often decided the outcomes. It was the sheer randomness of events, the small, seemingly insignificant moments that could alter the course of history. The GIs didn't capture the general because they were exceptional soldiers or because they were experts in intelligence gathering. They did so because, in that moment, fate intervened. A drunken mistake had led to the capture of one of the most important prisoners of war in the final stages of the conflict. The incident also highlights the unpredictability of warfare. It is often said that battles are won through careful planning, through superior strategy, and through the strength of arms. But in this case, it was a moment of chance that determined the outcome. It was a reminder that in war, anything can happen at any time. The line between success and failure is razor thin, and sometimes the smallest of errors can lead to the greatest of victories. In the end, the general was handed over to higher command. The GIs, for their part, didn't dwell on their unexpected success. They were soldiers, used to the chaos and unpredictability of war. To them, this was just another part of the madness. But history would remember this moment not because it was the result of strategic brilliance, but because it was the result of an unexpected twist in the war's chaotic narrative. And in that moment of drunken recklessness, the GIs had done something that would change the course of history. They had captured a general not through intelligence, not through force, but by chance. It was an absurdity that, in the end, became a testament to the unpredictable nature of war.